Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Today I'm going to be doing a full review of my Seiko 6139 6002, or commonly known as the Seiko Pogue. So there are those amongst us that have quite a strong opinion about what is a Pogue and what is not a Pogue, and I just want to address those before jumping into the review of my watch. Now there are some that have the very strong opinions that this one is the only true Pogue. It is the 6139 6002, the American released edition, with the golden dial. And then there's those that think any of these 6139 models with this golden dial is a Seiko Pogue. Doesn't matter from which year or from which continent. And then there's others that think any of the 6139 series, whether it's the golden face like this one here, the blue face like this one here, or the slightly more rare silver face like this one here, can be classified as a Seiko Pogue. Now I don't really mind what opinion you have. I'm happy for anybody to call any watch whatever they want. I call mine a Pogue. It's an Australian edition 6139. It does have the golden dial, but if you have a silver variation of it, it doesn't bother me that you call it a Pogue as well. So now that's out of the way, let's talk about why this is called a Seiko Pogue. Well, there are plenty of videos on YouTube and information online that gives you some really detailed stories about why this is called a Pogue, including dates and references and movements, etc. I'm not going to go through all that again, plenty of those around to watch. But what I thought I might do is just give you a little bit of a brief summary, so if you can't be bothered watching those extended videos about it, I'll touch on all the main points for you. Colonel Pogue was an astronaut for NASA in the 70s, and in 1973 he went to space to do a mission, and he wore one of these 6139s. And after that, it got designated the Seiko Pogue. But there's a little bit more of an interesting story to it than that, and I'll give you a little bit more detail. Colonel Pogue had joined NASA, and at that time they were issuing, and I think they still are, issuing the Omega Speedmasters as the official watches. He was going through the program, he hadn't been issued his watch yet, so he went out and bought himself one of these Seikos, and he was using that for all the timing and all the bits and pieces that he needed a chronograph for. He eventually was given his Omega, but he asked permission. Well, there's a bit of controversy about exactly if he asked permission or if he snuck it on board, but either way, he took the Seiko on board with him to space, and it was the first Seiko chronograph in space as well. It was also the first automatic chronograph in space. And the Seiko Pogue, or the 6139 series, is also known to be the first commercially produced and available to the public automatic chronograph. There is some other brands or another brand that made it apparently before the Seiko, but this is well known to be the one that is being released to the public first. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this just like I would review any other watch. I'm going to go through all your specifications, dimensions, and just show you it in detail. If you are interested, stick around to the end of the video and I'm going to give you a bit of a story about specifically this watch here, what it means to me, and the process I went through when I got this restored and how that came about and how much that cost me. But if you just want to watch the review, watch the next bit, but it'd be great if you stick around for the story at the end. But either way, let's flip around and I'll do that review. So here is my fully restored Seiko 6139 6002 with the golden dial, well known to us watch enthusiasts as the Seiko Pogue. Now this one was released and sold in Australia in 1976. Now I'll just run through the dimensions for you. The case is 41mm. It is 14mm thick. The lug width is 18mm. The lug to lug is 46.5mm. And the weight on this Uncle Seiko bracelet, sized to my 6 3/4 inch wrist, is 117 grams. Now you'll see that golden sunburst dial is showing a bit of its age, but it still has a lovely look to it. The indices at the hour markings are applied, with the indices at the 12 being larger than the others. The Seiko logo is also applied, with the chronograph and automatic words printed underneath. There is a printed minute and second track running around the watch face, just inside of that inner rotating bezel. The internal bezel here has markings at the 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50, with indices at the alternate hours and the minute track. That inner rotating bezel, due to its age, has faded a fair bit, and if you turn the crown, it'll turn that internal bezel. Now those brushed minute and hour hands used to have some lume in them, but they don't work anymore. And there's that nice long red counter, which is used by the chronograph, and a smaller sub-dial for the chronograph as well, and a nice little red marker to indicate the minutes as they pass when you have the chronograph activated. Now I had to have this piece of acrylic crystal replaced, as the original was so far gone that it could not be brought back to life. Now you'll see on the case there is a circular brushing all around the edges of the watch. The rest of it appears to be polished down the sides, underneath, on both sides obviously, and on that case back. When looking underneath, you'll actually see this nice little under beveled edge, which really makes it quite nice. It just gives it a little bit of a feature to it and makes it sit on your wrist even better. The stainless steel caseback is a screw down caseback, and as you can see written on there, although it's worn down a little bit, it says Seiko stainless steel 613960002, water resistant. It then has the specific model, and the year of manufacturer, which is 615398, Japan J. Now, as you can see, it comes with a day and date complication, which is activated a little bit differently with the quick set. If you push in on the crown once, you'll move the date. If you push in hard, you'll actually change the day. Now there was a particular concern with this one, so that doesn't work as well as it should have. However, it still works well enough. To activate the chronograph, you use the top pusher, which activates that little hand. To stop it, press it again, and push on the bottom pusher to reset. Now you'll see that I've depressed the chronograph now, and that for every 60 seconds or every minute that it goes around, that little sub-dial starts counting 1 minute at a time, up to a total of 30 minutes. And there you have it, moving around for 3 full minutes. You'll see that all of this is surrounded by this blue and red tachometer style fixed bezel. And when you look up and underneath, it has this really nice shape to it. It sort of feels like it's almost floating on top of that lovely polished side of the case. To set the time, all you need to do is pull out the crown, one position, and obviously turn. Now I'm not going to bother showing you anything with the loom because the loom doesn't work anymore, and I'm not going to talk too much about the bracelet. It's an Uncle Seiko that I bought aftermarket, as it did not have the original bracelet when I got it. I am going to do a review just of this bracelet, and I'm going to review that in a few days. If you want to watch that, please stay tuned to see that. Now the movement inside this watch is a 6139B. It's an automatic movement, but it does not have hacking or hand winding. It obviously has been restored, as I mentioned, but let's stick it on the time grapher and see how she looks. So as we can see, it runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour, has virtually no beat error, has a very low amplitude which is not ideal, and it runs in at about plus 30 seconds per day. Now I have had this watch restored, and those numbers aren't fantastic, but for a vintage watch, I'm not expecting it to be brilliant anyway. So that's okay, I'm happy enough with that. And here is my Australian Pogue on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. I do tend to wear it a little bit forward, but it also sits quite nicely up on the wrist as well within the dimensions of my arm. So what do I like about this watch? Well, for me, it's my personal connection to it. And I'll talk about that shortly after I finish this review section. But putting that aside, I have to say that my favourite part of this watch is how wearable it is. It sits really nicely on my wrist, it's very comfortable. I also really like this inner rotating bezel. I'm definitely going to be buying some other watches, or modern day watches, that have this feature as well, because it's quite cool. So it's a bit hard to find faults in this watch when you consider its age. It'd be easy to say that it does not have hacking or hand winding, or that it does not have sapphire crystal, but I don't really think that relates to this watch like this. Because it's a vintage watch, we can't really put those modern day expectations on the movement or the materials. I have to say that I just think it's really interesting, and I'm really lucky to have it in my collection. But let's flip the camera around now and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what this specific watch means to me and how I got it back into this working condition. So there's my full review of the Seiko Pogue, but as promised, I want to go through with you what this watch particularly means to me and the process I went through in getting it restored. My father actually bought this watch in the early 80s. It was second hand at the time, but he needed a watch to take diving. Now, you may think, ooh, that's not really a dive watch, why would you take that diving? Well, I do agree with you. He didn't really know any better at the time. He just thought it was quite a legible dial, something that would be easy to look at and see the time underwater. Now, to the watch's credit, it actually lasted quite a few years of my father wearing it regularly and taking it diving regularly. And just to keep in mind, at the time, he obviously hadn't had it serviced either, so it was now getting to around about 10 years old, and he was taking it diving, and he was wearing it regularly, and it was still working. But at some point, that water got in amongst the seals, or amongst those pushes there, and the watch stopped working. He then put the watch into a little wooden box. This little wooden box was his spot for all his little knickknacks, bits and pieces, or keepsakes. This is where my first memories of the watch occur. I would have been fairly young at the time. It was in the mid to late 80s, and I would look through this box thinking, ooh, look at all these little treasures, including this watch itself. Now you can only imagine what would happen to a watch with an acrylic crystal when it's banging around inside of a box with other sharp objects, pieces of metal, bits of rock, whatever he had in there. This acrylic got so scratched that you could not even see the dial, you could not read the hands. So now this brings us back to a few years ago, where I went from really enjoying watches and always having a couple of nice watches to really enjoying watches and started to buy and buy more watches. And when I was doing that, I was thinking about some vintage watches as well, and I thought, I think Dad's still got that old watch. I'll ask him about that. At the time, I didn't know what reference it was. I didn't even know it was a Seiko. All I had in my memory was this beat up old watch that was in this box. And kindly enough, he was very happy to give it to me. It'd been sitting in that box for a couple of decades, so I don't think he was too worried about not having it with him. And when he did send it over to me, I was quite thrilled to find out that not only was it just an interesting watch that my dad owned, but it was something with a lot of interesting history and heritage. And when I took it into the watchmaker to get it fixed, because firstly I couldn't even see the dial, and secondly it certainly didn't work, the first thing he said was, ooh, a Pogue. So that was quite nice as well. So it wasn't just me being excited about this watch. Now it ended up being rather expensive to fix. There were certainly some issues with the watch, not just the crystal, but the mechanism itself. The pushes had to be replaced, they were completely jammed and rusted in. There was a lot of effort put in by my local watchmaker, and I really thank him for that. But as a result of that effort, it took about 8 weeks to get the watch back, and it cost me about 600 Australian dollars to get it fixed and completely back to working condition. Now that didn't include the new bracelet that I bought. This is an Uncle Seiko bracelet. Dad didn't have the bracelet with it. I think he used to wear it on an old NATO strap. If you've got to this point in the video and you're still watching, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It makes a big difference to this channel. And I hope to see you in another video. See you for now.